Hello and welcome to Black Hat Asia 2021. We're pleased to be association partners and media partners with My Security Media for the event. We've been media partners in the past, so it's a shame we're meeting virtually, but do hope you enjoy this session. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with My Security Media. We publish the Cyber Risk Leaders magazine as well as the Australian Cybersecurity magazine and a bunch of other stuff that we do as well, but also the My Security Marketplace is our key platform if you want to look for resources, events, products and other solutions for your either enterprise or for your professional development and journey. So enjoy this session. This session we're going to be looking at Cyber Crisis Communications 101 and the perspective of security industry media. What I tend to do as an editor for the security sector and technology generally is just monitor the channels. We run about 10 different channels. We have about 3 cyber related channels, but then there's a whole bunch of others. But for this session, we're just going to look at some recent case studies and some current case studies as well, and then what companies should be doing, or at least best practice for crisis communications. And it really is crisis communications 101, but in a cyber context, and companies are still struggling to get this right. This is early April 2021, and some of the news of the day is Unify, or otherwise known as Ubiquity. These are sort of Wi-Fi units that have been compromised, and Brian Krebs, most of you will know, has been following this story, and this is a bit of an update that they provided. So initially the company came out and denied that there was a compromise or that there was anything to worry about. Brian Krebs stayed on the go with them, and ultimately they have come out and admitted that there has been a compromise. This puts the company into a sort of a difficult situation naturally, and now they're being threatened with security laws violations and now getting sued. And you can see there their share price from $3.49 dropped $24 down nearly 7 or 6.5%. So this is the impact that it will have on a company and how they manage both the communications and also how they are sort of being upfront about what is actually happening. And as of April 4, so just a few days ago, they've come out and confirmed that the breach has occurred and that what their response is. Companies need to be on the front foot with this, otherwise, again, from that perspective of the security industry and generally just media in general, once they understand that there is a story there, that they will follow it. Other news recently in Australia was the Channel 9 news breach, or the 9 network. Was taken down on a Sunday, and this is an interesting piece that they did. I won't play it, but it only goes for about 2 minutes, and this was their report on their own breach. They got the CEO out, which is standard, and that should be on the playbook for most companies. Is your leaders need to be able to speak to the media about what is happening and how the company is responding to a serious incident. They even got as high up as the Assistant Minister for Defence, Andrew Hastie, who's quite prominent here in Australia. Then they also got a cybersecurity expert to discuss the issues and the challenges there that companies face. Then they looked at other case studies and other companies that have been breached in a similar way, and this was a ransomware breach. And then they got spokespeople from ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and the Cyber Security Cooperative Research Centre, again discussing the scale of issues and really putting it into context for the audience about why the company was breached. The circumstances of the breach were not provided, somewhat obscure as to what they were doing, but they were managing it. It's not a new thing for the company to be dealing with, and they are reaching out to experts and industry professionals. So overall, it's worth watching in terms of that Communications 101 on what a media company will do themselves should they face a breach. And this is a story still being told as of this week. Another one is Facebook is hot in the news. Now this is a release of some 500 million records, but from a 2019 breach, but now those records are now being handed out for free. And Have I Been Pawned, or Troy Hunt, has been following this one. And this post here, I don't have a date on it, but it was just a few days ago. He was getting 40 to 45,000 requests per minute on Have I Been Pawned. That went up to 120,000 hits per minute that he was getting. So again, the context of this is, for a company like Facebook, 500 million users, there's some 7.5 million Australian accounts that have been compromised on this. This is just personal identifiable data, but again puts people into perspective of that data is out there, and they are very, very aware, and if they have a tool like Have I Been Pawned, they will use it and will discover that their data has been breached and what company is it associated with. So Troy Hunt and Brian Krebs is doing some great work on these particular case studies, and it's worthwhile watching. And in fact, Troy is hitting the big time even further on this one, and so it's a really great tool, that Have I Been Pawned, and he's since put up mobile phone numbers as well that have been breached. Some recent reports out in this context, and it looks like companies are paying ransom rather than dealing with the issue or allowing that information to be released. The Unit 42 from Palo Alto Networks report just came out a couple of weeks ago, and ransom payments have somewhat nearly tripled in terms of what they've been going up. So the average ransom paid here is now $312,000, and that's up from $115,000 in 2019. This is a very good report. We interviewed Sean Duca, the Regional Vice President from here in the Asia Pacific. So if you wanted to check that out, that's on My Security TV. But otherwise, the Ransomware Threat Report 2021 is also available on the My Security Marketplace. Now, this is a couple of years old from the IBM Cost of a Data Breach report, but we did do some work with IBM last year and the updates. And this report also provides ASEAN-related data and breaks it down into the regions as well. But the average cost of a data breach is heading up to that $4 million mark. And again, these are good reports to keep current on. These are annual reports, so check those out. Again, they'll be on the marketplace. So really, the idea of this session is to get companies on notice, to assist cybersecurity professionals, communicate to their executives, communicate to their boards about really how serious this is. Companies' data system, and not just the data, but also the systems, once they're compromised, can be taken over or taken down, or have data released out to the market, and it becomes a crisis, both a communications crisis and a PR crisis, but also it really can disrupt your own stakeholders across your supply chain. So it's something to be taken very, very seriously. We still do challenge boards to take it more seriously, and some of the best ways to actually address it is to get everybody together in a room and actually war game it. And run through a crisis scenario. What this slide here is putting up is obviously the structure of how a board and executive level team, crisis committee, and the operations and communications and the third parties should all be taken into consideration. The bottom right there, corporate communications, really do need to be brought up to speed, both on avoiding technical jargon when you're talking to the media, but also understanding not to say the wrong thing if you are interpreting technical jargon incorrectly. And also just how the company is also dealing with third parties, mainly the regulators and authorities, other stakeholders, and again I mentioned the supply chain, and general public, particularly if it's a large breach of personal identifiable data. The PII, that is, really comes into play as to how companies and government organisations are reaching out to these stakeholders and communicating. And it's not a one-off. This is an ongoing communication. Often it's a two-way. You're dealing with social media platforms as well. So it is a challenge, and it does need to be practiced and exercised for. Some of the other incidents, and it also comes down to the type of incident that you might be dealing with. This is a cyber incident categorisation matrix from the Australian Signals Directorate here in Australia, and it breaks it down as to whether it's a national security, federal government infrastructure up here in the top right, and it's a sustained disruption of essential systems and associated services, all the way down to simple scanning or reconnaissance and impacting on a member of the public. This is a good matrix, not only as an indicator for the company. This is something a board will understand in terms of how these types of incidents are impacting the company and what they are actually facing. I've kept this one up there. This is the 2018 to 2019 period, and this one here indicates Australia faced its first national cyber crisis. And again, once you sort of reach that, they are expecting, it sort of sets a benchmark, sets a standard. So whether it's a country or a company, Once you are understanding the context and the threat landscape that you face, that you are dealing with incidents, each time you set a benchmark, and then you need to maintain that standard, if not improve it. There's no going backwards on these incidents. A good case study to look at here in Australia is the breach of the Australian National University. This was 2019, but there's a full incident report on the breach of the Australian National University's administrative systems. It was a serious breach, and it went back some 20 years of data was gathered during this breach. Now, we reached out to the ANU media at the time, just asking some basic questions that most media will ask a company, and I was very impressed. They got back to us within the day. In fact, it was just within a few hours. They were able to provide us with our frequently asked questions page and also a comment or a sort of quote from an ANU spokesperson. So this was what I would class as standard and best practice from the ANU, both during the breach and once that breach was disclosed, and then fully afterwards, being very open and transparent about the breach itself. This is the data breach frequently asked questions page. What was taken? What do I need to do? How has any of my information been altered? Should I be concerned about my personal safety as a result of this data breach, as well as some other stories? So again, very well put together, and this is a 2019 breach, 6th of June, that's actually dated. Another good example I saw was the Marriott International data breach in terms of maintaining an ongoing page. And again, this is standard practice now for companies. If there is a breach, they need to have a standard web page, not on their own domain. Obviously, you want to have a separate domain, particularly if your home domain has been compromised, but making sure that there is enough information out there, toll-free numbers and the like for countries, and that was a good one. One not to follow or to look at as a case study of what not to do and how bad things can get is obviously the Equifax, and these are some of the key takeaways. I won't go into the full session here. There's plenty of reporting, as well as regulator and authority reports and investigations that were done on the Equifax, but it just got from bad to worse for them, and really not even understanding at the bottom there, understanding the context and the real threat that the company faced. So again, a good one to look at of what not to do. And I suppose the starting point for companies is understanding what the threat landscape and the cybersecurity regulation landscape is like at any given time, and it is changing constantly. This is the current sort of landscape here in Australia. We've just had the 2020 cybersecurity strategy released. There's the Australia's Digital Trust report from AusCyber for 2020. There's also an industry advisory panel report for 2020 as well, and they're currently updating Australia's international cyber engagement strategy on how Australia engages with its partners. And similarly, you can see the same thing in Singapore. The strategy is still underway. They do a Singapore cyber landscape report. The last one was 2019, and then ongoing reports, and then also the legislation that Singapore has. And this impacts the region. Each country within the region, obviously the Asia Pacific, has its own sort of frameworks, and these are always being developed, and it's almost difficult to update and stay current with. But data privacy acts, personal data protection acts are in a majority of the countries, and again, you need to understand where that data breach impacts and what legislation and regulations you're going to be facing. This is from Norton Rose Fulbright. This was an interesting piece of work that they did, just outlining the mandatory breach notifications. And Australia now has mandatory data breach notifications and a report done twice a year by the Office of Information, Public Information. Some other good references is this is a Red Team adversarial attack simulation exercises guidelines for the financial industry in Singapore. It's still version 1. This was released in November 2018. I did check and it does seem still current. It's still in version 1, but I just wanted to highlight how communication and as part of the key requirements do form part of the cybersecurity sort of hygiene and maturity models as well. So communication is critical. It forms a key component of this particular guideline as well, on how to red team. So what I'm trying to say is communications should be part of your red teaming exercise. So if a red team is successful, what then happens, and how are you going to respond and communicate those particular things? The main thing is the stakeholder management and the regulatory disclosure requirements on that particular breach, and you do have limited periods of time that you do need to make those notifications, so you need to understand those. The key components of security and cybersecurity are you would need to have that open mind. You need to get out of your silos, particularly in an organisation, particularly on the board or the executive level teams. Get them out of their silos and get them thinking outside the square and how this could impact a much broader context of the company, and also understanding the patterns both for stakeholders, supply chains, and understanding how a data breach can impact. The Facebook breach that we're currently seeing at the moment is a good one because that breach was from 2 years ago, and now the company is facing another wave of issues and conjecture around that data that was leaked 2 years ago. So again, it's a marathon on many occasions, and hence why you need to plan and understand the rolling process that can be involved. The other one is understanding the security versus crisis. So the physiological safety, how people respond to certain language as well is very critical. So understanding people in the context of a crisis is absolutely critical. In fact, it's probably up in the top 1 or 2 requirements. Understanding your people, understanding your stakeholders, particularly when you're dealing with the public, you have a various sort of responses as well. So it does come down to using professional communication people, professional PR people, and again from a media perspective, they will understand if a company is not responding appropriately or looking after its people along the way, and there's sort of sub-stories that can come out of major releases. Understanding the context of the breach is also very important. This is sort of the difference between IT security risk and OT security risk. So obviously with OT, you're looking at more integrity and availability, whereas IT, it's more that confidentiality and integrity as well. So understanding that CIA model does change in terms of the context, as well as the security risk assessments on that data, whether it's confidential, integrity or availability, also impacts on how you respond to that crisis. And I suppose the GRC, governance, risk and compliance models that you're using. So whatever posture you have will often be displayed out in the way that you manage a breach. So Ubiquity at the moment is probably looking at more like a siloed GRC approach in terms of how they are managing this. Certainly I wouldn't put them on the advanced GRC where they're focused on the business opportunity out of that. Reporting is enterprise-wide and processes are optimized. You would be struggling to mount that argument. So understanding again the crisis communications, how a crisis management team is put together. Importantly here is the business functions and business continuity management approaches. In fact, it really is critical in terms of that business continuity. If a particular data breach or system breach occurs, what is the flow-on effects through the organisation? And it may not even be a sort of a crisis in its own right, but it may lead to a crisis later on if some other business function stops. The crisis committee, you're going to be found with that communications manager and a spokesperson up there with the C-suite as well in terms of managing that. Who is the spokesperson and when? You don't need the CEO out there all the time. But obviously when it's a key message to be delivered, the CEO or the board chair would be likely to be the ones delivering it. Otherwise you might have a communications manager doing the regular updates and the like and dealing with the media. So understanding the planning and preparation process, there's some key principles there in a communication strategy. That is, be proactive when communicating, be open and honest, easier said than done for some companies. Communicate frequently, empower your leaders to communicate, and that means bringing up to speed your leaders on the cybersecurity context, either that threat landscape but also the language to be using, and encourage two-way communications. Don't just be putting it out there, and that sort of links back to the be proactive when communicating and allow that two-way. Understanding what your stakeholders will be required to understand, that containment and management, distress management, media and social media management, and threat response and management. And that's why it really is Crisis Communications 101. This is all basic stuff for either it's an emergency, some sort of disaster, or other sort of serious incident. Cybersecurity is right up there now. Also understanding your risk appetite, whether you want to display indecision, be irresponsible, or be impulsive, through to denial, dislike and disinclination. You really need to have that strategic approach and display that right corporate culture. We talked about the different ways of engagement, either through social media and the like. This is an opportunity. If it's a cybersecurity breach, it's a large one. It puts the company on notice, puts stakeholders on notice. It does potentially need to be an opportunity that needs to be taken, rather than that denial and disruption, and it just leads to brand damage. It can be an opportunity to be positive for brands, particularly if you can bounce back and you're seen to be open and transparent and trustworthy. You can gain that trust and limit a lot of the damage that can be done. So look, that's it, and hopefully I've displayed our main sort of message today, and that is get the Communications 101 playbook out, adapt it to your cybersecurity context, and bring up to speed your executives and your board. As a takeaway, you can reach out for the Cyber Risk Leaders magazine. This is now available, some 20 odd articles in there, and for the first 5 that actually watch this, reach out to me directly at promoteme@mysecuritymedia.com. We'll get you some merchandise from our Cyber War series. This is either a t-shirt or a mug, and these are nation state APTs that we've put together: the Russian bear, the Chinese panda and the Indian tiger. Let us know if you want a t-shirt or a cup, and we'll get one of those out to you. So thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the conference.